just behind you.
This is stage 1, 9.9 miles, Charlie's Bluff. Alright. There goes Kevin. I hope he doesn't try and make up time for his transit. I think he's either going to do really well or destroy his car this weekend. I don't think there's going to be an in-between. Morning.
Give you a time of 8:49.
Perfect.
Alright, I'll let you know at 30 and then a 5 countdown.
Awesome. Thank you. And thanks for working.
Thank you. Wouldn't miss it.
Yeah.
Wouldn't miss any rally.
Good. Thank you. 30 seconds.
30 seconds.
Okay, we're going cold in car.
Okay.
Sorry.
This is left 5 plus into right 5 plus over Smoke Crest 120. We're armed. 15.
Armed and dangerous.
10.
Check engine light just came on.
No, 10. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Left 5 plus into right 5 plus over Smoke Crest 120. Smoke Crest into a left 5 minus, no cut. Right 6 into mid crest, into a left 6 over crest, into a right 6 plus long over double Smoke Crest, into Smoke Crest, into a left 6 plus, mid Smoke Crest 180, flat Smoke Crest 250, Smoke Jump into a right 5 plus long, tightens 120, repeat right 5 plus long, tightens 120. Flat, very long crest into a left 6 plus 250. Flat, long Smoke Crest 250. Chicane right entry.
Dang it.
You good?
I know. It's a lot of work for the brakes to do.
Flat crest 300. Flat Smoke Crest 300. Smoke Crest into a right 5 minus, no cut 200. Go, go, go. Flat 300. Smoke Crest into a right 5 minus, no cut 200. Right 6 plus. Into a left 6 plus 150. Smoke Crest 50. Right 5 plus long. Tightens over crest 50. Go, go, go. There you go. Smoke Crest. Huh?
Yeah, go.
Okay. Smoke Crest 100. Triangle. Slow. Okay. Right 5 100. Flat Smoke Crest 70. Flat Smoke Jump 180. Brake Smoke Crest into a left 4 minus slippy, very long rough starts. $100. Right 4 minus over crest. Ush. Right 6 plus 70. Left 5 plus over Smoke Crest into Smoke Jump 120. Left 5 plus into Smoke Crest 250. Caution jump into a left 6 down, 200. Repeat, caution jump into a left 6 down, 200. Okay, go, go, go. left 6. Into a right 5 plus over small crest 350. Go, go, go. Go. Left 6, 50. Right 6 long, 70. Left 6, caution, left 6, stay out into turn left 1 around barrels. Repeat, turn left 1 around barrels. This is stay out into a turn left 1 around barrels. $150, crest 70. Right 4 long over small crest 200. Triangles.
Shit.
Yep. Small crest 50. Left 6 plus 180. Left 6 over crest 200. Go, go, go. Go, go, go. Left 6 over crest 200. Go. Left 6 over small jump 200. Go, go, go. Don't lift, don't lift. Left 5 minus over crest. Go. 70.
Can I slow down for this one a little bit?
Yes. Stay left over flat small crest 500. Go, go, go. Stay left over small crest into a right 6 over small crest into a small jump 200. Go, go, go. Right 6 over crest into a caution left 6 plus over jump 180. There's your jump. Flat left 6. Flat left, long crest 250. Sorry. Flat crest into a very long crest into a right 5 plus, go 350. Okay, go, go, go. Chicane right entry, car off after it. Man, that's a bad position. Oh, it's like a spectator car. Okay, flat crest, 120. Right 6 into a crest, 120.
Next.
Left 5, camber, 100. Flat small crest, 180. Stay right over long small crest, 100.
Next.
Caution turn left 3 long, tidy, 100. Flat small crest 180, left 4, 70.
Left 4?
Yep. Right 5 plus long over small crest off camber, tightens, then opens to a
what? What's this?
right 5 plus long over small crest off camber,
Okay.
tightens, then opens to a 6 over small crest extra long. 50.
Next.
Caution left 4 minus down into a turn right 3 minus no cuts. Repeat, right 3 minus no cuts. 150. Stay right over small crest 70, right 5 plus, opens over small crest into a left 6, 50. And a right 6 plus into a keep calm.
Yep.
Flat small crest 200, stay mid over long crest, commit, long flat crest commit 400. Go, go, go. Go, go, go.
There's a car in front of me.
Brake left 3 into a small crest 50. Right 5 minus over jump down 70. Left 5 over crest. This is repeat. Right 5 minus over jump down 70. Left 5 over crest. Go, go, go. Into a right 4 very long. Right 4 very long. Into a left 5 plus over crest. 50, right 5, no cut. Into a break, small jump, into a left 3, long over bridge. Break, small jump, left 3, long over bridge. Opens, 250. Small jump into a left 4 plus 50, right 5 long. Here's your left 4 plus 50 and a right 5 very long. Left 6 plus. Repeat, left 6 plus. Long crest into a caution, left 5 tidy. And a right 6 plus over small crest long, 300. Left 5 plus, 180. And a left 5 minus into finish into a right 5 plus very long. Repeat, left 5 minus into finish into a right 5 plus very long. Done. Good job.
Car's feeling good.
Yeah. Hey, that was fun. Smell those brakes.